Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Malaysians on the Move. Today, I have a very special guest. His name is John, and he has a very unique trajectory of, growing up in Malaysia, moving to the United States, and actually, he has now moved back to Malaysia. So, this is a first for the podcast, and I'm very, very excited to talk to John, who is dialing in from Kuala Lumpur right now. Hello, John. Welcome.
Hi, Yoshnee. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so John, I'm so thrilled to have you here because this is going to be a first kind of conversation for me where I talk to somebody that has already moved back to Malaysia. So, spoiler alert. But how about you take me back to your early days when you were growing up in Malaysia and how was that for you?
Yeah, I think I had a fairly standard suburban Klang Valley or like west side of Klang Valley upbringing. I grew up mostly around Bandar Utama. When I went to school around the area, I went to SKB1 and then finished high school at SMKBU3, did A levels at KDU, which I think no longer exists. But my father had told me a lot about how he had wanted to go to the US for university when he was young. And I thought it was very appealing that you don't have to declare a major, like pick what you are going to study until you have actually studied in university for a couple years. So I thought that system appealed to me over the British or Australian system where you have to decide in advance, am I going to be a doctor? Am I going to be an economist? So I had my heart set on applying to the US last. So I applied to the US for university and managed to get in. So I left Malaysia after A levels and went to uni and was in the US up until about a year and a half ago when I came back to KL.
Got it, got it. So, when you first got to the United States, how did you feel and how did you enjoy the early days?
Yeah, so I think it was interesting because I went to school in Dartmouth, which is in rural New Hampshire. And so I guess for people who don't know where that is, like the closest big city is Boston. It's about 2 hours away. So going from KL to there, it was definitely the most ulu place I've ever lived in, I think. And so that took some getting used to. Like it's actually quite good, I think, as a student to be separated from a lot of distractions. But at the same time, I think it was adjusting to the ruralness took a bit, but also just adjusting to, I would say, kind of like the insular, like university culture you can get in like an American small university town. That also took some getting used to. That was probably like the biggest adjusting thing that took some time.
And when you got to the US, was there like a Malaysian community that you could tap into, or you just kind of assimilated right away?
In my university, I think there were definitely single-digit number of Malaysians, and so we knew literally every Malaysian and Singaporean on campus, and we kept in touch. But there were just not enough of us to form like a Kampung Malaysia. So yeah, I had no choice but to make a lot of American friends when I was in college. But I managed to find a community of Malaysians who are studying in the broader region. So people studying from across the Northeast, in particular, the Northeast US. So during breaks, maybe I would see people in Boston or New York, and I kept like in touch with like Malaysianness in that way mostly, and seeing my Malaysian friends on campus. But otherwise, yeah, made a lot of American friends when I was in college.
Got it. So after graduation, I suppose you decided, you wanted to stay, you wanted to find a job, and how was that for you?
Yeah. So I graduated into kind of like the global financial crisis. We were a couple years into that. We had passed the worst, but I graduated in 2011. That was a very tough job climate.
Yeah.
And so I was very lucky. I got a job working at Capital One in the headquarters just outside of Washington, D.C. And so that's actually where I began my career. And they have a really good new grad analyst development program. So they rotate you through different divisions of the company. So you get to learn more about the workings of the business in addition to learning like basic analytic skills. So I spent about 3 years working there. And after about 3 years, I started getting calls from startups, messages on LinkedIn asking, hey, we need someone to work on data at a company. And so after about 3 years, I moved to San Francisco where I took a job working as the first analyst at a startup called NerdWallet.
Yeah. And during this time, your immediate family actually moved from Malaysia to the United States as well. Were
Yes.
they close by to you or?
Good question. Yeah. So yeah, the reason I was able to stay in the US was very lucky. We have a family member, an aunt is American, and so she sponsored green cards for the family. And it's through a very like weird program where you kind of have to wait like decades normally for a green card, but through some like quirk, we managed to get it. Um, I think because not so many Malaysians apply for this program. And so anyway, we managed to get it when I was a senior in college, and I have three younger siblings. So my parents thought, oh, it would be good to be able to send our kids to American college as well. So they moved the whole family to New York. They wound up living in a suburb of New York in Queens. By U.S. standards, we're not that far from me. Only a 5-hour bus ride from where I was going to college, and after I moved to DC, only a 5-hour bus ride from DC.
That's cool. And then you moved to San Francisco, and I mean your family stayed on the East Coast.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and how was your time in SF? You were like in the heart of Silicon Valley, rubbing shoulders with like tech bros, I assume.
Yes. Yeah. So I was there for about a decade, and I did a few different stints, mostly at startups. But so basically, I was at NerdWallet for 3 years, kind of helping set up the analytics function at NerdWallet, and then I moved to a company called Thumbtack, which is kind of like a marketplace for like hiring handymen and house cleaners. And I was leading growth analytics at Thumbtack for a while. I left after about 4 years and took an opportunity to join Cameo as their head of product data science. Um, and so I spent a year at Cameo, but I joined Cameo during the Great Resignation, when right after COVID, everybody was changing jobs. But
Yes.
then about a year after that, then you had like the come down from it when like all the tech companies started doing layoffs. And so at that time, I decided to look elsewhere, and I found a job at Pinterest working on growth biz ops. So I joined the business operations and strategy team at Pinterest, where I worked for almost 2 years. And at the end of my time at Pinterest, my wife and I decided to move back to Malaysia. And so we came back to Malaysia, and I took a break from working for a while. And yeah, that was kind of my journey in SF.
Yeah. So before we get back to you moving to Malaysia, I kind of want to dive deep a little bit into your time in San Francisco. So you have a very like illustrative career, and you move jobs, and I can see that you really climbed up the corporate ladder per se. So in my books from the outside, it kind of feels like you were very settled there. You mentioned that you have a wife, so I'm assuming you got married sometime in those years. My assumption is that you built a community in San Francisco. Like you had friends. Your family was across on the East Coast, but they were still somewhat like a 5-hour plane ride away. What was going through your mind? Were you just like being like, "Hey, yeah, I'm settling roots here. I just got married. I love my career trajectory." Like, take me back to your headspace during
Yeah.
those years.
Yeah. So I would say like after graduation, for the first 5 years, I was very set on coming back to Malaysia.
Oh,
Um, I really missed home, even though my family was in the US. I have a lot of friends.
despite having the green card and starting your career, you actually felt that pull. Oh,
Yes,
okay.
yes, and I mean it's definitely not very rational, lah. And at the same time, like part of it, I think is also just like nostalgia, because
Yes.
I never really got to experience being a young adult in Malaysia. Getting to go to Mamak every night, so there's always that exotic appeal of living abroad, being like, oh man, I could I could be at the Mamak with my friends every night if I was just back home.
Yeah.
Um, and so like I think that was kind of like a dream I had in my early 20s.
Okay.
And then like you said, I got more settled in the US, and kind of focused on just building a life there. My wife is American. We met in San Francisco, and her family has roots in the Bay Area, so it would be very natural to settle in the Bay Area. But something we talked about before we got married was she knew I really wanted to move back to Malaysia.
Okay.
And I had said like, look, I'm comfortable, but be nice maybe when we retire, maybe we move back to Malaysia or something. And
Yeah.
she said, I can tell from the way you talk about it, you really want to move back to Malaysia. We don't have kids yet. We're not encumbered by anything. So we should do it before we get too old. And then one day, after COVID, I was like getting pretty burnt out at work. We were
Yeah.
talking about how it'd be nice to take a career break at some point. And then I said, well, why don't we take a career break in Malaysia? And we both thought, that could work. And so that kind of like spun up into this idea that eventually wound up a couple years later. with me like quitting Pinterest, and like we both like quit our jobs on the same time and just have been on a career break in Malaysia until like the last couple months.
In the initial months with your career break, were you just thinking that this is just like a temporary time to chill and just go with the flow and enjoy my time in Malaysia, but potentially go back? Or I guess, did you end up seeing yourself as like, oh, I want to stay a little bit more and actually try to get a job here?
So I think I would say I was exploring both of those. Um,
Okay.
because since we don't have kids yet, we are quite flexible in life. If we want to go back, we'll just go back. If we want to stay here, then we can stay here. No problem either way. And so, yeah, I spent part of my career break trying to explore the local like job market, the local tech scene, trying to understand what people are working on, understand, is there demand for my skill set? What does compensation for my like skill set look like? I talked to even like people in Singapore just to understand the Singaporean scene as well.
Mm.
Um, and so there was a lot of that. And I would say like right now we're still like trying to figure out how long we actually want to be in Malaysia, because I think whenever we do start a family, my wife would love to be closer to her family in the Bay Area. Plus my family is in the U.S. as well, so there are reasons that we are like thinking of we probably don't want to be here for too long, but for the foreseeable future we are still here because we enjoy the lower cost of living, we enjoy the food here, so and life is comfortable. So it's also at the same time getting a bit hard to leave. So we'll see.
Yeah, yeah. So one thing you mentioned that's very interesting was that you didn't get to experience what it was like to be a young adult in Malaysia and living, going to mamaks and stuff. Maybe you can share a little bit about what actually stands out to you about the lifestyle in Malaysia as a young professional versus in the US. Specifically, maybe highlighting what's actually better that you found in Malaysia, and maybe what are some of the things that are lacking.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think it's also a bit difficult because I am no longer a young professional. I'm now in my mid 30s, and so
That's still
I
young. That's still young.
fair, fair. But yeah, so I mean, I think it's when you're not earning very much, like relatively in your 20s. I think like the appeal of the lower cost of living in Malaysia like feels a lot greater, and also the sense of like especially if you have good friends back home, like I do. Everyone's like starting their career. They're like things are pretty exciting, but also like this lepak culture. People are still free to lepak.
Yep.
In the US, in your early 20s, like to an extent there is that, but I think it dissipates a lot faster. Like I remember my very early 20s, basically right after college, like you still kind of have that student mentality of like, okay, let's lepak, let's hang out in the US. But within a couple of years, people like get busy, and it becomes a lot harder to plan hangout times with friends. Whereas my observation whenever I visited Malaysia was like it's so easy to just get people to lepak at the mama or whatever. I had some
Yes.
friends who would go to the bars and then we go to mama afterwards, and it always felt a lot more like unstructured and free flowing and fun. Um, in a way that I had a lot of fun with my friends in the US too, but you had to be much more intentional about planning get-togethers with friends in the US after a certain age. So that was one thing that or I guess like a combination of two things that I like kind of in my head idealized about Malaysia. It's like, wow, things are so cheap, the food is so good, but also it's like, oh, my friends are so free to hang out and whatnot. Um, Obviously a lot of that has changed now. Now that I'm in my 30s and everybody's got if not spouses, they've got long-term partners. Everybody has also structured their life a lot more. So it's kind of like we have a bit of an arrested development perhaps in Malaysia, and going from my 20s, it takes a while. But yeah, that was I think like one thing that stood out to me in my observation when I was in my early 20s, idealizing what it would be like to be a young adult here in Malaysia.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I know you said you have a lot of friends, but for your wife, and I guess you're going to have to speak on her behalf, but she moved to Malaysia potentially not having a community or not knowing maybe many people, maybe just through you. So, how did she feel about that? Was it something that she struggled with or not really?
Oh, definitely, yes. I think it would be the rare person not to struggle with that, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, And I mean, like the flip side is, it's like what a lot of us who move to the US or anywhere outside of Malaysia have had to do. Though sometimes, maybe you have Kampung Malaysia and you don't need to do that. But
Well, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I would say that people like us, when we moved for school or college, it's easier to actually make friends versus
Hmm.
making friends as an adult, you know?
Absolutely. That's the other thing I was going to say. It's like it's still easier when you're in a phase of life when everybody's moving. Like university, everybody in the US has come from all over the continent. When you start a new job in your early 20s, everybody you work with, unless you work at an unusual company, if you work at a lot of places that are hiring new grads, you'll have a lot of other new grads to hang out with. So there's a lot of small structure to meeting people in your youth in general. And so that makes it a lot harder, I think, to move as a settled adult. So, I'm really grateful to my wife for being willing to try this, but it was definitely extremely hard. And it's I think also harder if you're an introvert, like we both are. Like we both are definitely introverts, and so that means we are less likely to put ourselves in situations where we're going to cross paths with people, or even if we are, we might not have the energy to really invest a lot in that interaction. And so it's taken a lot of time, I think, to get to a place where it feels like it's not just I have a community, but also she has a community. Like she now, I think, has some friends here, but still, it's all people that we've both met, friends as a couple. And so that's definitely been an area where I think she's probably not had as great a time as she would have if you know she had a different personality, perhaps, or just otherwise knew people and more people in Malaysia.
Understood, understood. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. Because one of the things that I try to ask people is like how they went about building community, and I think you had a reverse interesting perspective because you're going back. And also, I think one thing we didn't talk about, which if you could shed a little light on, is all the friends in childhood. Um, for like decades long. I know you kept in touch, while you were in the US and they were in Malaysia, but did you feel like it was the same when you came back just recently and like picking up from where you left off per se? After so many years, friendships can kind of change, especially if you grow in different ways. But did you find that for yourself, or you still had that like anchored friends that you've known since you were like 5 and like nothing
Hmm.
changed between you guys?
Yeah, so this is actually really interesting because I would say I actually did a bad job of keeping in touch with most, if not, yeah, most of the friends from my childhood. I can only think of like maybe like one person that I went to school with in Malaysia that I'm still in active or even like somewhat active touch with. And not because I don't like any of the people or whatnot. It's just like I wasn't around, for like reunions and
Exactly.
and all these things like Chinese New Year or Hari Raya when you go to each other's houses. So I really didn't have like my like community from the people I grew up with. Like a lot of them have already moved. Like they're not even in KL or Malaysia anymore as well. And so I would say like one lucky thing is that I had this community of people that I had met, primarily people who had studied in the US, like usually around the same time as me, but a lot of them had come back. And so that was like a community that I had kept in touch with a lot because they were the people that I would try to like catch up with every time I visited family in Malaysia when I would come back like for like a couple weeks vacation and see how they're doing. And so and then they would like add people to their group that because they had a WhatsApp group, they would just add people to their group that that they could go to mamak with or whatever. And so like we kind of like became like a bit of a friend circle that was like pretty ready made to like hang out with anytime I visited. And also like when I came back, like they were the first people who were like, oh, let's get you a touch and go card or all these other like
I see.
small logistical things about moving back to Malaysia. Um, and so that's I think a bit of an unusual thing. But the thing I would say that was really helpful was honestly that having a WhatsApp group at all,
Yeah.
because being in that WhatsApp group with them, I got a bit of updates on their life from time to time, and it was easy to organize meetups with them when I visited.
Okay, okay. So now that you've found a job in Malaysia, can you share a little bit about that experience and how you're liking it?
Hmm. Yeah, so my job situation is very unique because I'm actually working for an old boss from the
Oh,
US. So I have an old boss that I worked with in NerdWallet, and now he's an executive at a company called Peerspace, which is
okay.
basically like Airbnb for event rentals and production studio rentals, stuff like that. And so he kind of recruited me to join him and work remotely because Peerspace is a bit of a unique company that they are like fully distributed. They don't have an office anywhere, so all their employees work from home. So he said, "Hey, if you want to work from Malaysia, like we can figure something out." And so I actually work from Malaysia, and they're okay with me working, like only part time overlap with the US hours. So I do have to stay up late
Yeah.
most nights for calls with the US, but only quote unquote until about 3 a.m. or so, and so
Oh, crap.
that's like not great. But luckily, I'm a night owl, so I don't mind it too much. And it's nice to have the flexibility. Otherwise, with the rest of my day, because they told me like as long as you get the work done, we're not too bothered about when you work. So it's a very
Yeah.
unique situation. But yeah, one I'm lucky I found.
Yeah, yeah, I see. And so, how do you feel like your mornings then? Because I guess no time for mamaks on weekdays now, or
Yeah.
so what do you do during the day?
Yeah. Let's see. Somehow there's always errands to run. So it's like, I'll usually start my day sometime between 10 a.m. and noon. Um, and usually it's like we have to do like some shopping for the household or,
Yeah,
go to the doctor or whatnot. So there's always like stuff to do. And then I like after lunch, I'll do a bit of work. And then I can take a break for dinner, maybe go to the gym or go for a swim. And so it's like I don't have to, a full 8 hour nonstop block of work, but it's actually quite nice because I feel like I get a bit of variety throughout my day.
yeah, yeah, I see. And then do you feel like on weekends, like you feel really tired from like sleeping late, or that's not really the case for you?
I mean, I do sleep in on weekends, so I'll get quite a late start to my day if if there's nothing I need to do on a weekend.
Yeah.
But I think that's the main like symptom of tiredness. I feel like otherwise I'm, perfectly happy like staying out late with my friends because anyway I was already up late, the night before anyway.
Yeah. And was your wife able to find a job or?
So she's not really been looking very hard, but yeah, I think she's starting to look at things like remote jobs. I think for an American, it's definitely I think you get a bit of a sticker shock coming to Malaysia and seeing wages here, um,
Yeah.
and also I think depending on the field, like something that both of us feel about our jobs, like I'm a data scientist, she's an executive assistant, is that even if you're really really good at your job and you bring like literal world class skills to the job, um, like the compensation is not really there most of the time in Malaysia. Like you kind of need to find the perfect fit for the role and somewhere where they will really value it and be willing to pay way above Malaysian market rate for that. And so
Yeah.
it's quite often easier to look like on a more global scale. And if you are world class in your skills, then like go into the remote job market and try to find something. But I think she's also enjoying right now, the fact that can be slumber and just not worry about much. So I think she's taking her time with her job search as well.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. Sounds like you're quite enjoying your time in Malaysia, so you feel like you did make a good decision, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, I mean, honestly, it was a bit tough for us at the beginning. But yeah, overall, I think it's been quite beneficial in many ways. I'm like definitely glad we did this because it brought me a lot closer to like extended family, like my grandma
Mm.
and my cousins, and also just a lot of friends who existed primarily as people I saw once a year or less, especially during COVID when we couldn't come back at all. It's been really great to like, be with a lot of people. So I feel we're definitely getting a lot out of the time you spent here over a year so far. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure how much longer we'll be here, but so far it's been a good time after the initial bumpiness of adjusting.
Yeah, that's awesome. So usually I try to end the podcast by asking people the golden question, which is, will you ever move back to Malaysia? But you already did. And I think you've kind of alluded to the fact that you are considering moving back to the United States because your wife is American. And someday when you do decide to start a family, you'd like to be close to not just her family, but your family as well. So can I assume that you are going to actually do the reverse and move back to the United States?
uh, so we don't know yet. I think it's on the table. So something we're looking at, for example, is the political situation. I don't think what's going on in the U.S. We're big fans of being exposed to measles, for example.
Right.
Um, yeah, and so that's something that we are still thinking about. So we've not made any final decisions there, but yeah, it's definitely on the table that we'd go back. I would say if you've lived abroad for a very long time, it's honestly actually quite hard to come back in many ways. Like since both of us
Yeah.
like we love to eat, like we're foodies. One of the things that's great about coming to Malaysia is awesome Malaysian food, right? But the other thing you realize coming back is like, oh, actually, our Western food here is mostly like fusion. Actually, it's Malaysianized Western food. It's not real Western food. Like
That's
the
right.
if you want American pizza, you want American brunch, it's not happening in KL. So that's like a reverse culture shock a bit for me. Didn't realize that my tastes had changed that much, for example. Um, so there are things like that where we go back and forth. Like there's family reasons and like cultural reasons why we would like I think be comfortable in the US, and would ideally like to be back there. But at the same time, looking at the geopolitical situation and whatnot, there's also reasons why we're thankful to be in Malaysia right now.
Yeah, any closing remarks, any advice to Malaysians that are in your situation or potentially thinking about moving back? Anything you want to plug in before we end?
Yeah, so funny you mentioned that. I have a newsletter which I think I gave you the link, which I started basically to like. I wrote like my very first post was, I'm starting this newsletter basically for anyone who might be in a similar situation as me. The newsletter like talks a lot about career stuff, like people who are data scientists who are like trying to grow in their career, but also people who are maybe they are migrants to somewhere like trying to figure out and like how to start a life somewhere new, or the reverse, people coming back to somewhere they grew up. And I'm like, look, this is my life story. This is what I've gone through. If any of this sounds applicable to you, that's what this newsletter is hopefully going to be helpful for. So it covers random things like how to be effective at work as an analyst when you get asked silly questions, but also things like how do you find like nice restaurants to eat when there's like places with thousands of reviews of Google Maps. How do you go through that data? So I want to plug that newsletter because I think you asked, what advice I have for people who are in this situation. Well, it's going to be in there. But also, if you're looking for just like how to boil it down to something simple, I would say if you really love Malaysia, you really want to come back. It's a difficult decision, and a lot of things have to line up in your life to make it possible. So in my
Yeah.
case, I'm very grateful that my wife, she really like wanted to make this move. Because she saw how much I wanted it, and we were able to find a way to make it work. It's very difficult though, but it's easier than it's easier than it's ever before, right? Because now we have remote work. It's so much easier to be doing this kind of thing, and so if you're curious about it, you could always just give it a try. That's kind of like the approach we took. There's not for the faint of heart, and like I'm pretty flexible. I think my wife is a bit less flexible, but if you have the enough mental and emotional flexibility, you can try it. And so yeah, that's kind of how it's worked out for us so far.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. Yeah, I'll be leaving a link to your newsletter in the episode show notes. To the listeners, please check out the newsletter because John has a wealth of experience and there'll be a lot to learn from him. So definitely check out the newsletter. And thanks so much, John, for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. I'm so thrilled that you did this, and I'm really inspired.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'm grateful you made space for me, and hope other people find it useful.
Bye, John.